The evening was calm, the sky painted with fading shades of gold as the sun went down. On the corner of a busy street stood a small restaurant. Its windows glowed with warm yellow light, inviting people in after a long day. Inside, laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of freshly cooked food filled the air. People came here not for luxury but for comfort. It was a place where the regulars were known by name, and gossip traveled faster than the food on the plates. That night, however, was different. The door opened slowly, and in walked a man who did not belong to the world of small-town chatter. He was tall, dressed in a dark tailored suit that seemed to shine even under the dim lights. His shoes clicked softly against the wooden floor, polished enough to show his reflection. This was Mr. Carter, a black tycoon whose name carried weight across cities. People whispered about his success, his wealth, and his ability to rise above struggles that would have broken others. He was not just rich, he was respected, even feared by his rivals. The restaurant fell silent for a moment. Forks paused in midair and conversation stopped. Eyes turned toward him, some filled with admiration, others with envy. To the regular customers, he was like a figure from a different world, stepping into theirs for reasons they could not guess. To the waitress, Anna, his presence sparked something darker. She watched him with a sharp gaze, the corners of her lips tightening into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Anna had worked at the restaurant for years. She served food with a polite face but carried resentment deep inside. Life had been unkind to her. Bills piled up, dreams faded, and every day felt like a repeat of the last. She saw in Carter not just a customer, but a man who had everything she thought she deserved. And standing behind the counter, her boss, Mr. Reynolds, noticed him too. Reynolds was a man who had long lost his shine. Once proud of owning the restaurant, he was now drowning in debts. His eyes followed Carter with a mix of bitterness and calculation. Carter walked calmly to a table near the window, the light casting a soft glow on his sharp features. He sat down, not with arrogance but with quiet dignity. He looked around briefly, acknowledging the curious stares with a slight nod before picking up the menu. To him, this was just another evening, a chance to enjoy a simple meal away from business meetings and endless phone calls. He was unaware of the storm silently forming around him. Anna approached his table, holding her notepad. She forced a smile as she asked what he would like to order. Her voice was polite, but inside jealousy burned. She could see the expensive watch on his wrist, the way his suit fit perfectly, and she hated how easily wealth seemed to sit on him. Carter looked up at her, his eyes kind, his tone respectful as he placed his order. There was nothing arrogant about him, nothing cruel. But sometimes kindness itself can stir envy in those who have already chosen bitterness. As she walked back to the counter, Anna's boss leaned toward her. His voice was low, but his words were sharp. "Do you see him? That man has everything. We could use someone like him to fix our problems. Hard to be the problem." Anna frowned, unsure of what he meant, but his smirk told her enough. To Reynolds, Carter was not just a customer, he was an opportunity. Meanwhile, Carter sat alone, unaware of the conversation. He glanced outside the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Memories of his journey crossed his mind. The struggles of being underestimated, the nights of hard work, the people who doubted him. Every scar, every betrayal had brought him here, to the life he had built with his own hands. To him, success was not luck, it was survival. But the people in that restaurant did not see his scars. They only saw the shine. And in places where envy grows, shine becomes dangerous. A few customers whispered among themselves, speculating about his wealth, his business, his connections. Some admired him, saying it was good to see a man who looked like them rise so high. Others sneered quietly, their pride wounded by the reminder of what they never achieved. Anna returned to serve his food. She placed the plate in front of him, her hand steady but her mind racing. She couldn't stop thinking about what her boss had said. The way Reynolds looked at Carter was unsettling, filled with greed and malice. She wanted to ignore it, but part of her wondered, what if he was right? What if this man's downfall could become her chance at freedom? Carter, unaware of the darkness in their hearts, thanked her politely and began eating. Every movement he made was calm, controlled, a man used to being watched. He had no idea that this ordinary meal in a small restaurant would soon become the starting point of betrayal, lies, and ruthless revenge. The night carried on, but for those inside, something had shifted. The air felt heavier, the look sharper. Carter's arrival had turned the restaurant into more than just a place to eat. It had become a stage where greed and envy would soon play their parts. He had come only for peace and food, but what awaited him was a storm that would test not only his strength, but the true face of those who stood against him. And so, while he sat there in quiet dignity, two pairs of eyes watched him closely, one filled with jealousy, the other with desperation. Neither Anna nor Reynolds knew how far their choices would take them, and neither could imagine the ruthless revenge that was already writing itself in silence. The restaurant grew quieter as the night went on. Customers finished their meals, paid their bills, and left with cheerful goodbyes. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving the place in a softer glow. Mr. Carter, the Black Tycoon, had already left, stepping into the night with the same quiet dignity he carried everywhere. But even after he was gone, his presence lingered in the air like a shadow no one could shake off. Behind the counter, Reynolds, the owner, leaned against the register. His eyes were narrowed, his thoughts racing. He was not thinking about closing the restaurant or balancing the books. No, his mind was stuck on the man who had just walked out. That expensive watch, that perfect suit, the calm confidence, everything about Carter screamed wealth. To a man like Reynolds, struggling to keep his business afloat, it was not just a reminder of what he didn't have. It was an insult. Anna was wiping down the tables, her movements slow and distracted. She too kept replaying the image of Carter in her mind. The way customers looked at him, the hush that fell when he entered, the quiet respect in people's eyes. It was something she had never felt in her own life. She was just a waitress, invisible most of the time. And when people did notice her, it was only to demand more coffee or complain about the food. Watching a man like Carter made her feel small, almost powerless. Reynolds suddenly spoke, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the silence. "Do you know who that was?" he asked. Anna shrugged, though she had a good idea. "Some big shot, I guess. You can see it written all over him." Reynolds smirked. That wasn't just some big shot. That was Carter. The Black Tycoon. Owns properties all over the state. Investments, companies, deals with people at the top. He's worth more than this entire street combined. Anna looked at him, her brow furrowing. So what? He came in, ate his food, and left. What's that to us? Reynolds leaned closer, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. It means opportunity. Don't you get it? Men like him walk around thinking they own the world, but they have weaknesses. All of them do. If we play it right, we can bring him down and take what we need. Anna froze, her cloth hanging limp in her hand. She stared at Reynolds as if he had lost his mind. Bring him down? He's rich, powerful. People like that, if you go against them, you'll end up crushed. But Reynolds only chuckled darkly. His eyes gleamed with the kind of madness that comes from desperation. Not if we're smart. Look around you, Anna. This place is dying. Bills are choking me. Debts are piling up. I've tried everything and nothing works. But then he walks in. Like fate handed us a chance. If we can find a way to stain his name, to trap him, maybe even extort him, we could turn our lives around. Anna's heart thumped faster. The idea scared her, but it also tempted her. For years she had been stuck in the same routine. Long shifts, rude customers, little pay, no future. Now for the first time she was hearing a possibility. Dangerous, yes, but thrilling. She looked at Reynolds and whispered, "And if he fights back?" Reynolds smiled coldly. "Then we hit harder. People love scandals. You don't need to prove a thing. You just need to make others believe. A man like him with his reputation, all it takes is one ugly rumor, one public scene, and he'll be buried in questions. The rich fall harder than the poor. Remember that?" Anna tried to shake the thought away, but it stuck to her like glue. As she finished her cleaning, she imagined what it would feel like to see Carter stripped of his power. To see people whispering about him not with respect but with disgust. For someone who had felt invisible her entire life, the thought of holding power over a man like him was intoxicating. That night she went home restless. The image of Carter sitting calmly at the table replayed again and again in her mind. She thought about his kindness when he spoke to her, his polite tone, the way he thanked her. Part of her felt guilty, but another part whispered louder, "This is your chance. Don't let it slip." Meanwhile, Reynolds sat in his office above the restaurant staring at a stack of unpaid bills. His hatred for Carter grew stronger with every passing minute. He told himself it wasn't envy but survival. "If I don't take what's his," he muttered, "I'll lose everything that's mine." In the dark corners of that small-town restaurant, a hidden plot was born. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't written down. It grew quietly like poison spreading through water. Two people, bound by jealousy and desperation, had seen a target in a man who had done nothing to them. And though Carter had left the restaurant unaware, his life was about to be entangled in a web of lies that would shake everything he had built. The waitress lay awake that night, torn between fear and desire. The boss sat with his debts, convincing himself that betrayal was just business. And somewhere in the city, Carter slept peacefully, never imagining that his ordinary dinner had sparked the beginning of a scheme that would try to bring him down. The following week, the restaurant looked the same from the outside. Warm lights glowing through the windows, the smell of food drifting out into the cool night air. But inside, everything was different. For Anna and Reynolds, every day since Carter's visit had been filled with whispers and planning. They spoke in quiet corners behind closed doors, weaving their scheme like spiders spinning a dangerous web. Reynolds had thought it through carefully. The goal was simple: destroy Carter's reputation. If they could humiliate him, frame him, and make people believe he was not the respectable man he seemed, then everything else would follow. Money, influence, leverage, all of it would fall into their hands. And the first step was to strike where he least expected it, in public in front of witnesses. On a Friday night, Carter returned. He walked in calmly as he always did, dressed in a neat gray suit this time. His expression was peaceful, almost tired, as if he had come seeking a quiet meal to escape the noise of his busy world. He chose the same seat by the window, nodding politely to a few familiar faces. But this time the air around him was heavier. People's eyes followed him, not just out of curiosity, but out of the whispers Anna and Reynolds had already started spreading. Rumors about Carter's arrogance, his supposed cruelty, and his shady business dealings had begun to trickle into town. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than belief. Anna approached his table, her notepad in hand. Her smile looked sweet on the outside, but her heart raced. She remembered Reynolds's words, "Make it believable. Make them hate him." She set down the glass of water, but her hand accidentally slipped. The water spilled across the table, wetting Carter's sleeve. Gasps echoed from nearby tables. Anna widened her eyes in mock fear. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then lowering her voice but not too low, she added, "I didn't mean to upset you." Carter looked up, confused. "Upset me? You didn't upset me," he said calmly, brushing at his sleeve with a napkin. His voice was steady, polite, forgiving. But Anna gave a nervous laugh, shaking her head. No, it's fine," she said quickly. "Just, please don't yell at me again. I don't want any trouble tonight." The words cut through the room like a knife. Heads turned. Forks paused. A few customers whispered. Carter froze, his brows knitting in shock. "Yell at you?" he repeated softly. "I've never raised my voice at you." Reynolds appeared suddenly, his face twisted into a mask of false concern. He placed a firm hand on Anna's shoulder and looked at Carter with a glare. "That's enough," Reynolds said loudly. "We won't tolerate this kind of behavior here. Not in my restaurant." Carter stood slowly, still composed but visibly stunned. "Excuse me? What behavior? I haven't done anything." His voice was calm, but in the silence of the room it carried weight. Reynolds shook his head and sighed as though dealing with a known troublemaker. "You think your money lets you treat people however you want? First my waitress, now my customers? We've heard the stories about you, Mr. Carter. You may fool people in the city, but you won't fool us here." A ripple of murmurs spread through the restaurant. Customers looked at Carter differently now, suspicion flickering in their eyes. Anna clung to her act, biting her lip, pretending to hold back tears. "Please," she whispered, just loud enough for the nearby tables. "I don't want him to hurt me again." The scene had been staged perfectly. In a matter of minutes, the respected tycoon was painted as a villain. People who had admired him only days before now looked at him with doubt. A man's reputation, built over years, was being shredded in seconds. Carter's chest tightened. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but something inside told him to remain calm. He looked around, meeting the eyes of strangers who no longer saw dignity in him, only scandal. He felt a wave of betrayal, not because of the lies, but because of how quickly people chose to believe them. "I came here for a meal," Carter said finally, his voice quiet but firm, "and I will leave here with my name intact." The truth doesn't need me to shout, it will stand on its own. But Reynolds sneered, waving him off. Get out of my restaurant before I call the police. You're not welcome here anymore. Carter turned slowly, his face unreadable. He paid his bill at the counter, every movement deliberate, his silence louder than any argument he could have made. And then he walked out the door, his shoulders straight, his dignity unbroken, but his heart heavy with the knowledge that lies had already taken root. Behind him, Anna and Reynolds exchanged a glance. They had done it. The first strike was complete. They had planted doubt in the minds of the town, and they believed they had Carter exactly where they wanted him. But what they didn't see was the fire quietly sparking in Carter's eyes as he stepped into the night. He had been humiliated, framed, attacked without lifting a hand. Yet he knew one truth: revenge, when it came, would be patient, precise, and merciless. The days that followed were heavy for Carter. At first, he thought the strange scene in the restaurant would fade away quickly. Surely people would see it for what it was, a lie, a setup, nothing more. But he underestimated how fast poison spreads when people are eager to drink it. By Monday morning, whispers about him had already spread through town. In coffee shops, in grocery lines, on street corners, people repeated what they thought they saw. The waitress said he shouted at her. The boss told him off in front of everyone. Didn't you hear? He's got a temper. By the end of the week, the story had grown bigger than the truth. Some claimed he threw food. Others swore he threatened Anna. Not a word of it was real, but repetition made it feel real. Carter noticed the shift immediately. At his office, some of his partners avoided eye contact. A few meetings were rescheduled, though he knew they were simply canceled. Even his staff seemed uneasy, hesitant in their words, as though the rumors had made them question the man they had once trusted. He walked through the city streets and felt it in the air, eyes following him, glances that used to hold respect now weighed down by suspicion. A man who had built his reputation on honesty, on strength, was suddenly marked as something else. And all it took was one night, one performance in one small-town restaurant. For Carter, it was more than humiliation. It was betrayal by strangers who chose to believe lies over dignity. But he did not show anger. He carried himself the same way he always had. Calm, steady, quiet. He thought that silence might be enough to keep the storm from growing. Yet the silence only allowed the storm to grow louder. Anna, meanwhile, played her role to perfection. Customers who returned to the restaurant asked about that night, and she lowered her eyes, pretending to be embarrassed. I don't want to talk about it, she would whisper, but her voice was just loud enough for everyone to hear. And Reynolds, always standing nearby, would shake his head, sigh, and say, some men think money makes them untouchable. His words dripped like poison, convincing more and more people that Carter was not who he seemed. Soon, Carter's business deals began to suffer. Investors grew nervous, unsure if they wanted to be tied to a man whose name was now clouded by scandal. Journalists, always hungry for a story, began asking questions. Mr. Carter, how do you respond to the accusations? They asked, cameras flashing. He said little, refusing to fuel the lies. But in the world of headlines, silence often looked like guilt. At home, Carter sat by the window late into the night, staring at the city lights. His phone buzzed constantly. Some messages from loyal friends who told him to fight back, others from opportunists who distanced themselves politely. He felt the weight of it pressing down on him, not just the damage to his name, but the speed with which people turned away. The same people who once praised his strength now doubted his character. It was the first time in years that Carter truly felt powerless. Money could buy many things, but it could not buy back trust once it was broken. His empire, built brick by brick with sacrifice and determination, seemed to tremble on shaky ground. And yet, beneath the pain, something else grew inside him. A quiet fire. Each rumor, each whisper, each false look of pity carved itself deep into his memory. He did not lash out, he did not beg for understanding. Instead, he listened, he watched, and he waited. If his enemies believed this fall would break him, they did not know the kind of man they were dealing with. Anna and Reynolds, meanwhile, celebrated in secret. The restaurant, once struggling, suddenly had more customers than usual. People came not just for the food, but for the story. They wanted to see the place where the powerful tycoon had been brought down. Business was good, and Reynolds felt stronger than ever. He raised his glass to Anna one evening after closing. You see, he said with a grin. "One little act and the mighty Carter is on his knees. People love to see the great ones fall. And we gave them a show." Anna laughed softly, though part of her felt uneasy. Sometimes at night she remembered the look on Carter's face, the confusion, the quiet dignity. It haunted her, but she pushed it aside. She told herself it didn't matter. She deserved more than she had, and this was her chance. But Carter had not truly fallen. Not yet. What Reynolds and Anna mistook for defeat was only silence. The kind of silence that hides a storm waiting to strike. Carter had lost ground, yes. His reputation was bruised, his business shaken. Yet within him, patience was sharpening into a weapon. He knew the truth had power, but truth needed timing. The fall from grace was not the end. It was only the beginning of something else. Something darker, something colder. As Carter sat in his quiet home staring out at the city, he whispered to himself words no one else would hear. "They think they've beaten me, but they've only woken me." The world believed Carter had fallen. His name was whispered with suspicion, his face no longer welcomed with the same admiration. But what no one noticed was the way he moved in silence. While others talked, Carter watched. While others spread rumors, Carter listened. He became a ghost in plain sight, slipping through the city with calm eyes that saw more than anyone realized. In public, he appeared quiet, almost defeated. He walked with the same dignity, but his voice was softer, his presence smaller. People thought he was shrinking under the weight of shame. But behind that mask, his mind was sharper than ever. Every whisper reached him. Every glance revealed who was loyal and who was quick to betray. He took notes not on paper but in memory, storing every detail like a man preparing for war. At night, Carter drove back to that small-town restaurant. He parked across the street, hidden in the shadows, watching through the glowing windows. Anna moved from table to table, smiling, laughing, pretending to be the innocent victim. Reynolds strutted around like a king, shaking hands, boasting loudly, enjoying the attention their lie had brought. Customers leaned in, asking for the story, and Reynolds told it again and again, each time making Carter look worse. Carter never stepped inside. He simply watched. He studied the way they moved, the way they talked, the way greed made them careless. People who think they've won often reveal too much, and Carter knew patience would uncover their cracks. But watching wasn't enough. He needed proof. So Carter began speaking quietly to people others ignored. The dishwasher, the delivery man, the young cook in the back. They had no reason to lie, no loyalty to Reynolds, only tired eyes and overworked hands. Carter listened to their complaints. The way they muttered about unpaid wages, about Reynolds cutting corners, about strange money being moved under the table. One evening, Carter paid for the cook's bus fare home. In return, the boy nervously admitted that Reynolds had been hiding cash in the office upstairs, avoiding taxes, running side deals. Another night, Carter helped the dishwasher fix his broken bike, and the man whispered about Anna, how she often left with Reynolds late at night, carrying envelopes, talking about making it big once Carter was ruined. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Carter never pushed, never threatened. He just listened, offering kindness where no one else did. And in that kindness, people opened their hearts. They told him things they would never tell a journalist or a rival. He collected their words like gold, silent but powerful. Still, the lies against him continued to grow. Newspapers printed vague lines about unconfirmed reports of misconduct. Social media filled with strangers repeating the restaurant's story. Each time Carter read those words, his chest burned with anger, but he forced it down. Anger was reckless. Revenge, to be effective, had to be cold. Weeks passed and Reynolds grew bolder. He bragged openly about his victory, hinting to customers that Carter would soon be finished. He didn't notice the stranger who sometimes sat quietly in the corner, pretending to read a newspaper, recording his words with a hidden device. He didn't notice the young cook slipping copies of receipts into a plain envelope. He didn't notice the dishwasher whispering into his phone late at night, sending Carter the details he needed. Anna, too, became careless. The guilt that had once flickered in her eyes was gone, replaced by greed. She bought new clothes, hinted at moving out of her small apartment, and told friends she was finally getting what she deserved. What she didn't know was that Carter had already followed her once, watching from a distance as she met Reynolds in a dark alley, exchanging envelopes of cash. He didn't confront her, not yet. He only observed, storing the scene in his mind like a blade waiting to strike. The town thought Carter was finished. Even his closest business associates believed he had stepped back in shame. But the truth was the opposite. He was moving more carefully than ever before, building his case in silence. The louder his enemies became, the deeper their hole grew. Late one night, Carter sat at his desk, the city lights glowing through the window. In front of him lay a folder thick with notes, photos, receipts, and recordings. Each piece on its own was small, almost meaningless. But together they painted a picture that would ruin Reynolds and Anna far more thoroughly than they had ruined him. Carter leaned back in his chair, his face calm but his eyes burning with quiet fire. "They think they're clever," he whispered to himself. "But greed blinds fools, and I've been watching." In the silence of that night, Carter knew one thing. The time for patience was ending. Soon the time for action would come, and when it did, the very lies that tried to bury him would become the weapons he used to destroy them. The weeks of silence were over. Carter had waited, watched, and gathered every piece of truth he needed. Now the folder on his desk was full. Receipts showing stolen money, recordings of Reynolds bragging, whispered confessions from staff, and even photos of Anna exchanging envelopes in the shadows. For a long time, Carter had walked with his head lowered, carrying the weight of lies. But on this morning, when he stepped out of his home, his stride was different. Calm, yes, but no longer quiet. His time had come. He didn't begin with noise. Revenge rarely works when it shouts too soon. Instead, Carter made his first move with precision. He sent copies of his evidence piece by piece to people who mattered. Lawyers, tax officers, business regulators, even a trusted journalist who had once admired his journey. He didn't send it all at once. No, Carter was smarter than that. He let the evidence flow like a steady river, impossible to ignore, undeniable in its truth. Within days, whispers began to turn. This time they weren't about Carter's supposed cruelty. They were about Reynolds' shady business. Customers who once sneered at Carter now questioned the man who owned the restaurant. Why had the staff been unpaid for weeks? Why did receipts not match? Why were taxes missing? Then, one evening, Carter walked back into the same restaurant where his downfall had been staged. The room froze just like it had the first time he came. Only this time the air felt different. He wore no flashy suit, only a simple coat, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had endured fire and walked out unburned. Reynolds stiffened behind the counter. Anna froze mid-step, the tray in her hands rattling slightly. The customers turned, eager for another scene, but they had no idea this time the roles were reversed. Carter did not shout. He did not accuse. He simply stepped forward and laid an envelope on the counter. Reynolds frowned, opening it. His face drained of color as he saw what was inside. Photographs, receipts, a copy of his recorded words bragging about framing Carter. "You've been busy," Carter said quietly, his voice carrying through the silence. "Lies are quick, Reynolds. But truth is patient. And now it's here." Reynolds stammered, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Anna stepped closer, peering into the envelope, and her face turned pale. She knew instantly what it meant. The mask she had worn for weeks cracked, her false smile vanishing as fear crept in. Carter leaned slightly closer, his tone low but sharp enough for the nearest tables to hear. "You thought you could destroy me with whispers, but you left footprints in every lie, and I followed." The next morning, news spread faster than the lies ever had. The journalist Carter had trusted published the story in bold letters. Restaurant owner exposed in fraud and false accusations. Details filled the article. Staff testimonies, stolen money, forged accounts, even Anna's role in the staged humiliation. Where once Carter's name had been dragged through mud, now it shone brighter, cleared by the weight of undeniable evidence. Police came to the restaurant that afternoon. Customers gathered outside, watching as Reynolds was led out in handcuffs, his head down, his arrogance gone. Anna stood at the doorway, her face pale, trembling as questions rained down on her from reporters and townspeople. The lies she had lived behind crumbled all at once, leaving her exposed and small. Carter, meanwhile, did not gloat. He didn't need to. His revenge wasn't in shouting or pointing fingers. It was in the way silence turned into a storm that swept his enemies away. His dignity had never left him, and now the world saw it again, stronger than before. People who had once doubted him rushed back, offering apologies, shaking his hand, praising his patience. But Carter only smiled faintly. He had learned something deeper, that respect easily given can be easily taken. But true strength lies in standing tall even when the crowd turns against you. That evening, as he walked through the city, Carter felt the weight finally lift. His name was clear. His enemies were undone. And yet he did not feel joy. He felt something colder. Revenge had not healed the wound of betrayal. It had only reminded him how fragile trust could be. Still, he knew this. He had not been broken. And those who tried to destroy him had been shattered by their own greed. His revenge had been ruthless, yes, but it had also been precise, calm, unstoppable. The town would talk about that story for years. Not just about the lies, but about the man who chose silence over rage, patience over panic, and in the end delivered justice so sharp it left everyone speechless. The storm came fast, faster than Anna and Reynolds ever imagined. One day they were laughing behind the counter, celebrating their victory over Carter, and the next, their names were printed in newspapers, not as heroes, but as frauds. The same customers who once leaned in to hear their lies now turned their backs, disgust written across their faces. Reynolds was the first to crack. The restaurant, once buzzing with curious visitors, emptied overnight. Chairs stayed stacked, tables untouched, and the smell of food no longer drifted out the doors. Instead, the air outside carried whispers about stolen money, unpaid staff, and the shame of betrayal. He stood at the register, staring at the empty space, his mind racing but finding no way out. His debts hadn't disappeared. They had grown worse. Now creditors demanded payment, and with the truth exposed, there was no more business to save him. Anna fared no better. Her friends who once admired her strength avoided her calls. Neighbors whispered when she walked down the street. Mothers pulled their children closer, and no one offered her a smile. She had dreamed of wealth, power, and freedom, but instead she found herself trapped in a cage built by her own greed. The money Reynolds had given her was gone, spent on clothes, small luxuries, empty promises. What remained was fear, shame, and the memory of Carter's calm voice saying, "The truth is patient." The authorities moved quickly. Investigators searched the restaurant, seizing boxes of receipts, ledgers, and hidden cash. Reporters swarmed the place, their cameras flashing like lightning. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything to say about the fraud charges?" One shouted as he was pushed into a waiting car. His face was pale, his hands trembling. For a man who once stood so tall, boasting in front of crowds, he now looked smaller than ever. Anna tried to run from the storm, but there was no place to hide. She was summoned for questioning, her name linked to Reynolds's schemes. In the interrogation room, her voice cracked as she tried to explain. "It wasn't my idea. I just followed orders. I didn't know it would go this far." But every word only made her look weaker. She was no longer the bold waitress who staged a false attack. She was just another name in a story of greed and betrayal. Outside, the people talked. They remembered how Anna had once played the victim, tears in her eyes accusing Carter of cruelty. Now those same people shook their heads in disgust. "How could she do that to him?" they muttered. "She had us fooled. All of us, and trust once lost is never given back." Reynolds's collapse was harsher. With his debts exposed, creditors stripped him of what little he had left. His restaurant closed for good, the doors locked, the sign removed. What had once been his pride became nothing but an empty building with broken windows, a silent reminder of his downfall. The empire he had hoped to build never existed. Instead, he became a story parents told their children. "Don't let greed blind you or you'll end up like Reynolds." Anna sank into loneliness. People she once called friends crossed the street to avoid her. Job offers never came. Wherever she applied, whispers followed. "Isn't she the one who lied about the tycoon?" No one wanted to hire her. No one wanted to be near her. She was left with nothing but regret, haunted by the face of the man she tried to destroy, the man who never raised his voice, who let silence deliver his revenge. And Carter? He did not visit them, did not gloat, did not throw their downfall in their faces. He had no need. The truth had done the work for him. His life moved forward, his reputation stronger than ever while theirs crumbled into dust. That was the weight of betrayal. It always came back heavier than the one who carried it could bear. One evening, months later, Anna passed by the restaurant building. It stood dark, abandoned, its windows dusty, its sign gone. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and felt tears sting her eyes. Inside, she saw her reflection, tired, worn, hollow. She whispered to herself, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." But deep down, she knew. It ended exactly how it was meant to. Reynolds, too, faced his own ruin. Stripped of money, reputation, and freedom, he sat in a cell, staring at the gray walls. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by silence. The man who once said, "People love to see the great ones fall," had become the example of his own words. Their collapse was not dramatic fireworks or sudden violence. It was slower, heavier, and far more painful. A steady crumbling of pride, respect, and hope until nothing remained. The lie they thought would make them powerful instead left them powerless. The scheme they believed would bring wealth left them with empty hands. And the tycoon they thought they could destroy, he stood taller than ever, untouched, his silence more powerful than all their noise. The storm had passed. The lies were broken, the guilty exposed, and the small town that once turned its back on Carter now spoke his name with respect again. But for Carter, this was not about applause or pride. His victory was not loud, not celebrated with shouts. It was quiet, measured like the man himself. He walked through the city streets one evening, the same streets where people once whispered cruel rumors. Now those same whispers had changed. He was innocent all along. He didn't fight with anger. He fought with patience. Some even lowered their heads when he passed, ashamed they had ever believed the lies. Carter did not smile, nor did he scowl. He simply nodded politely, carrying himself with the same calm dignity he had never lost. In the business world, his reputation rose higher than before. Investors returned, partners called, and journalists praised him as a man who had endured scandal with grace. But Carter no longer cared for their sudden loyalty. He had learned a hard truth. Respect that can be taken so quickly is never truly secure. What mattered most was not what the crowd said, but the fact that he had not broken when they turned against him. Anna and Reynolds were gone from his path. Reynolds remained behind bars, his arrogance crushed into silence. The man who once strutted through his restaurant now sat alone in a cell, staring at the ruins of his life. Anna lived in the shadows of shame, invisible to the very world she had once tried to impress. She carried her downfall like a scar, unable to escape the weight of her choices. Carter never sought them out again. He knew their punishment was not in what the law gave them, but in what life had taken away. One afternoon, Carter returned to that small-town restaurant. The building stood empty now, its windows dusty, its door locked. He stood there for a moment, remembering the night of his humiliation, the spilled water, the false tears, the whispers that turned the room against him. He felt no anger anymore, only clarity. He whispered to himself, "This is what lies build, hollow walls and empty rooms." Then he turned and walked away, leaving the building to crumble into nothing. That night, Carter hosted a quiet dinner in his own home. Around his table sat a few close friends, people who had stood by him when others doubted. They shared laughter, stories, and simple food. To Carter, this was wealth, trust that could not be bought or stolen. When one of his friends raised a glass and said, "You've shown the world what real strength looks like," Carter shook his head. His eyes softened, his voice steady as he replied, "No. I've shown the world what silence can do. Words are easy, lies are quick. But patience is a weapon no one sees coming." The room fell quiet at his words. They all knew what he meant. Carter had not fought fire with fire. He had not screamed, not begged, not tried to prove himself with empty noise. He had waited, collected truth, and when the time was right, he let the truth speak louder than all the lies combined. As the evening went on, Carter stepped out to his balcony. The city stretched out before him, lights flickering like stars on earth. He breathed in deeply, feeling the weight finally lift from his shoulders. His journey had been brutal, but he was still standing, stronger, sharper, wiser. He thought about Reynolds and Anna one last time, not with hate, not with pity, but with a kind of cold certainty. They had tried to ruin him, but in the end they had destroyed only themselves. Greed had blinded them, envy had driven them, and lies had buried them. Their story was over. But his would go on. Carter whispered into the night, not to anyone in particular, but as a final word to himself. Betrayal may wound me, lies may follow me, but I will never break. And those who come for me will always find me waiting, silent, patient, and ready. The city lights glowed brighter as if answering him. And with that, Carter turned back inside, ready for the future. He had not just survived. He had shown that dignity, truth, and silence could be more ruthless than any weapon, and so his revenge became more than a story. It became a lesson, one the town would never forget, one that left everyone who heard it speechless.